Hi crafty friends, it's Donna here. I've got another set of 10 cards to share with you today. This is the next in my series of 10 cards using the sketches from Sandy Allnock's Operation Right Home. We're going to be working through sketches 41 to 50 today, and I'm using this gorgeous paper from Paper Rose Studio called Rainbow Twirl. Today I'm going to be working in metric. If you're watching from the USA, then you have all of the measurements that you need written on the sketch, and you can make exactly the same cards using those measurements. However, if you live anywhere else in the world and you're using metric, then your standard card size is going to be 148 millimeters by 105. And I'm going to use this chart that I've made in a previous video to convert my measurements. I will leave a link in the box below to where to find that chart. The first measurements that we're going to convert is this back rectangle, which is 2 1/4 by 5 inches. The 2 1/4 is along the short side of the card, and so I'm going to work down the short side column until I find 2 1/4 inches, and that comes to 56 millimeters. Then the 5 inches runs along the long side, and so I'm going down there, and 5 inches converts to 135 millimeters. I'm doing the same thing for the top panel, 2 3/4 by 3 1/4 inches, with the 2 3/4 being on the long side and the 3 1/4 inches being on the short side. That gives me 74 by 80 millimeters. I'm only going to do the measurements in the video for this first card. After that, I'll have them pre-written on. But if you'd like a little bit more information, then please go back and watch that other video. I like to back all of the parts of the card with a nice contrasting, usually darker, piece of paper, and I've chosen some really lovely brights for these cards. When I use sketches, I almost always use the measurements given to cut my patterned paper, and then I make my background paper just a smidge bigger. For a couple of these cards, where the pattern was a bit busier, I've done things slightly differently, and I'll let you know when I get to those cards. I've chosen to use some stamped images for a couple of the cards, and this is one of them. This is called Sketched Flower 3, and I've stamped that in Memento Tuxedo Black ink and coloured it with my Cupcake markers. For all of the cards, I start by layering up each of the elements with its coloured background, and then I construct the whole card. For pretty much all of today's cards, I've used glue, although I have reached for my foam tape just a couple of times. As long as the layer that you're gluing down is smaller than the layer below it, then the assembly is very simple. But in the case of this flower, it's going to hang over that banner at the top and the bottom, and I need to stabilize it. The floral paper and its background is 2 pieces of paper deep, and so that's how many layers I'm adding to the top and bottom of my Cupcake coloured flower before I glue that down. You'll see me repeat this process over and over, although I'll leave out some of the details in the explanations as we go. The sentiment for this first card comes from a set of sentiments called Rainbow Poppies, and this one's ticket shaped, which is a lot of fun. Once again, I'm going to need to build up the right hand side with 2 layers of paper. And here's the finished first card. As we go through the next cards, I'm only going to explain the things that weren't in this first card. You'll see the process, but you don't need to hear me explaining the same things over and over. This next sketch was very interesting because the sketch and the dimensions on the sketch don't match. I cut my front panel to match the size that was written in numbers, but you can see that dimensions are quite different to the sketch. I suspect it should have been 3 inches, not 4. However, having cut out the big panel, I loved the way that those 2 orange flowers looked, and so I decided to go with the written measurements rather than the visual sketch for this card. The sentiment comes from the Celebrate Cut Apart sheet, which are gold foiled and embossed, which I really like. And all of the layers on this card sit happily onto each other with nothing hanging off, so that there was no balancing up to do. This This next sketch has a pair of papers as the background, and I've already glued those to my card base. One of the papers in the pack had this gorgeous wreath on it, and I really wanted to use it, even though it was much too big for the card size that I've chosen. And so I've cut a good quarter of it for this angled panel today. This sentiment comes from the lovely Florals Magnolia stamp set. Life is tough, my darling, but so are you. And I've added that on so that it sits horizontal on the card. Sketch 44 is just perfect for highlighting your favourite paper with that beautiful big panel on the front. I've chosen a lightly patterned paper for the back, this absolutely gorgeous wood grain for my long panel. It seems a bit of a shame to cover up most of it. And then the beautiful florals from my front panel. Once again, we're going to need to level up the two sides. I'm just going to add the simplest of sentiments, a little happy birthday from the Rainbow Poppies set. And I'm going to make that stand up just a little bit from the page with one layer of scrap cardstock behind it. This next card, made with sketch 45, turned out to be one of my favourites from the whole set. I've decided to turn the sketch sideways because I wanted to include these beautiful little cupcakes from the Hey Cupcake stamp set. And I've chosen the rainbow paper and an inky paper, and I just love that combination. Whenever I add my extra scraps, I try to find a way to flip my cardstock so that the same part is hanging over, which really helps me to decide how wide my strips need to be. When it came to colouring the cupcakes, I chose the pinks and oranges and yellows from that inky background piece. The sentiments on this card are my favourite part. I knew I had some sentiments somewhere that had cake on them, and eventually I found them in these black and white sentiment sheets. And so the sentiment reads, "It's your birthday. This calls for cake." And because this is printed in black on white cardstock, I've just used my Memento Tuxedo Black marker so that the white core of the card won't show through. For this next card, sketch 46, I've decided to leave the background as one of my coloured cardstocks instead of one of the patterned papers from the pack. And at the end of the day, I don't like this card as much as the others. I wish I'd used more pattern paper. It's still fine, it's just not my favourite. I've decided to add both the sentiment and a floral panel to my front panel. This sentiment is from the Rainbow Poppies sentiment set. And once again, I've propped up the right side, this time by only one sheet of paper, because that vertical strip of the wood panelling paper is also only one sheet of paper tall. I love sketches like this next one. There's something about a banner coming in from the side onto a square panel that I just love. There are a few similar sketches around, and I always love the cards I make with them. I've chosen those beautiful little dots to be my background panel, and then a floral paper for the main panel. And I'm stamping a sentiment from the Lotus Bouquet stamp set, which says, "Hope your day is as wonderful as you are." I'm going to finish off with just a few glitter enamel dots. Sketch 48 is a much busier sketch, and so for this sketch, I've chosen to use the measurements on the sketch as the measurements for my background papers, rather than my patterned papers. It'll just make everything a little bit smaller and give a little bit more space between the elements. You can see there that because I've used scraps of paper, they're not actually the same width, but the eye will be tricked and we won't notice that, as long as they're all the same height. The design also doesn't line up There was no way to jigsaw that back together because this came from 3 smaller pieces that I had remaining from previous cards. The sentiment comes from the All Occasion Sentiment set and says, "Wishing you a fabulous day." Sketch 49 has a banner coming in from the top, and so when I've backed this, I've left a border only on each side and the bottom. Once again, we're going to need to layer up, only this time the right hand corners of this front panel are sitting 4 sheets of paper above the background, and when there's that much height, rather than layering up 4 sheets, I tend to just use a little bit of foam tape. It's roughly the same height. I'm going to make another thank you card here because I use so many of them. And there's the second last card done. Finally, sketch 50. This card has 2 1-inch strips along the bottom, and I've just layered those on and turned my card over and laid the blade of my scissors against the cardstock to cut those level. This time I'm going to make a get well soon card, and I'm using the Flurry of Butterflies die and some of the patterned paper to cut a bunch of butterflies. I've scattered those around the card with one flying off the panel and just glued them down with my regular glue. I'm going to leave you with some close-up photos of the cards, but also at the end of this video you will also see the sketches with the measurements marked on them. So if you want to come back and just click to the end of this video, you can find those sketches with all the numbers on them all in one place, rather than having to flick through the whole video. Feel free to like and to subscribe. That's all for today's cards, but I'll be back soon with another video. Bye for now.